Hey, it's Chris here from Bow River Troutfitters, and today we're going to demystify how leaders work. I know when I started fly fishing, getting into leaders, I knew I needed them, but I found that whole process very confusing. So today we're going to explain leaders and the tippets that go with them. Now, the first thing you're going to notice on leaders and tippets is this X rating with a number in front of it. So 5X, 4X, 3X, 2X, that kind of thing. What this refers to is not the breaking strength of the leader, but the diameter of the material making up that leader. That's the important thing to remember. We're going to talk about how that affects your fly fishing in just a bit. But basically, a smaller number like 1X or 0X actually refers to a much thicker diameter material. And then a bigger number like 5X, 6X, or 7X is going to refer to much finer, more delicate thinness of material. And that does, of course, affect how strong the leader is going to be before it breaks, but that's not a hard and fast rule. I mean, if you look at standard Rio PowerFlex leaders, their 3X leader is an 8.2 pound breaking strength. But when you look at their more advanced Trout PowerFlex Plus leader, that 3X leader has a 9.5 pound breaking strength. Different strengths of breakage, but the exact same thickness of diameter. That more just comes down to what the materials are being used to create that leader and what that leader is made for. So how does the diameter of my leader and tippet affect my fly fishing? Well, you really got to think of it in terms of what size of fly you want to cast. So for example, a larger, heavier diameter leader is just going to naturally transmit more energy to the fly. And that's important when you're trying to cast a bushier, larger dry fly or nymphs or streamers, which are a lot heavier. That extra energy is going to make sure that you transmit and turn over that fly properly so it presents in the water the way the fish like. But if I'm using a really delicate dry fly, something that's very small, and I use a heavy leader, it's going to transmit too much energy, and that very delicate fly is not going to present well when it hits the water. That's where I then want to go to a much lighter leader. It transmits less energy, but it delicately turns over those small flies better. Now, on the flip side, if I use a really delicate leader like a 5X leader, but I try to turn over a big heavy streamer fly, it's not going to work either, right? Not enough energy. That streamer's not going to turn over properly. It's going to pile up on top of the leader and make a mess. So the next thing I want to talk about then is, what about the length of your leader? How does that affect your flies? Well, a 9-foot leader is your basic all-around go-to length of leader, and it absolutely is very versatile. But here at Bow River Troutfitters, we also do carry shorter 7.5-foot leaders and longer 12 and 15-foot leaders. It's pretty simple to understand. When you shorten your leader down, you transmit more energy from the rod to the fly. And if you're having a hard time turning over heavier flies like nymphs or streamers, that can be a really good choice. But what about a longer leader? Well, a longer leader dissipates more energy before it reaches the fly. So it's a great way to actually get more delicate presentations with your dry flies. Less energy, you can go up in a leader diameter and still get a nice soft presentation. But the other benefit with a longer leader is that when it goes down on the water, you have more distance between your fly line and the fly. So if you've got spooky trout that are line shy, you have extra distance. That can really help get more hits. The other advantage is you've got more slack line on the water. So if there's dynamic currents in between you and the fish, that longer leader will give you more time before drag starts to affect the fly. Again, upping your chances of getting a nice dry fly presentation. One thing I do want to say though, longer leaders are a little bit trickier to cast. So you have to have your cast down pat, or you will tend to get more tangles and tailing loops. We're going to talk about tippet next. Now, the key thing to remember about tippet is it's straight mono. It has no taper, but your leaders are tapered. It's very important to understand that. Your leaders, where they attach to the fly line, are very thick, and then they taper down thinner and thinner and thinner till they get to the end of the leader, which is where that 4X or 3X or 2X diameter comes into play. That taper is very important to keep the energy transferring smoothly from the rod to the actual fly itself. Now, we often use tippet just to repair an older leader. Let's say I'm fishing a 3X 9-foot leader, I'm cutting flies, changing flies, breaking off on fish. Eventually that leader just gets shorter and shorter and shorter. Now, if it's a 3X leader, I could simply use 3X tippet, keep the diameter the same, and then just rebuild the section that's getting cut off so that my shorter leader again becomes a 9-foot leader ready to go. But let's say you're out fishing, you've got that 9-foot 3X leader, and you really wish for a certain dry fly presentation that you had a 12-foot 4X leader. Well, that's also where tippet comes into play, because I can absolutely just add a thinner diameter tippet to my thicker diameter leader, keep that natural taper, and make it longer. Just remember, you do want to always downsize your tippet to the leader if you're going to lengthen it so that that taper remains. All right, last thing that I want to mention about leaders and tippets is just a little bit about the materials that are used to actually create them, because that can also have an effect. So we've got our standard PowerFlex leaders here from Rio. It's a great general all-round purpose leader. It's fairly supple, which means when it does lay on the water, it has a little bit of softness and give, and that's really nice for dry fly presentations. But you'll also notice that the breaking strength is lighter than something like the PowerFlex Plus leaders. There are more expensive leaders you can buy, and what they'll generally do is have the same diameter, but they will have a stronger breaking strength. They tend not to be as supple as the regular leaders, but if you are fighting fish where you're worried about breaking off a little bit easier, something like PowerFlex Plus leader can be a really good choice. There are also specialized leaders that are actually more supple than even the standard leaders. So Rio make these Supple Flex trout leaders. You'll notice that for the given diameter, the breaking strength is lighter. However, these do tend to be stretchier. They do have a little bit of give and flexibility, and really it's about getting the least amount of drag, the nicest presentations when you're doing very technical dry fly fishing. Now here at the shop, we also carry fluorocarbon leaders and tippets, totally different material than nylon, which is normally used to make leaders and tippets. Fluorocarbon has some very interesting properties. First off, it sinks. So if you are fishing nymphs or streamers, it's a great way to get everything down faster into the water column. The other advantage is underwater, fluorocarbon tends to be less visible to fish, which means you should have a higher success rate in actually catching those fish. Fluorocarbon does also tend to be a little bit more abrasion resistant than nylon. That does depend, but it also does tend to be a little bit weaker breaking strength for a given diameter. So factor these choices in. If you want something to get better strikes underwater with sinking flies, it might be a nice option. As always, big thanks to you guys for joining us today. Hopefully this helps you understand how leaders and tippets work better. Please do subscribe to the channel so you don't miss all the other educational content that we always have coming out. And otherwise, thanks so much for joining us. We'll see you all soon.